Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeffrey Moss from Parker Dewey. Really excited everyone could join us today for what's going to be a great panel. A lot of discussion recently about the key competencies of a successful campus hire and if college students and recent grads really have the core skills. At the same time, many companies are talking about their desire and interest to recruit and hire student athletes because those students in particular have demonstrated those core skills. There's a general appreciation for what those students bring to the table, whether it's around grit, teamwork, self-discipline, motivation, etc. But unfortunately, all too many of them get left behind because of the current processes. Today, we'll discuss some of the challenges associated with recruiting student athletes from college facing companies and students alike. We'll highlight some strategies to address these challenges, and then we'll talk about how some of these strategies can apply to other student populations as well. I could tell you from a prior conversation the four of us had, it sounds like a lot of these issues that make it difficult for companies and students alike aren't limited to student athletes. So joining me today for what will be an incredible session, Amanda Brown, who leads the career enhancement and employer relations efforts for the student athletes at Northwestern University. Kelly O'Sullivan, who leads campus recruitment at Alpha Sites, and Tony Denhart, the University Relations Director at GE. So let's jump right into it. Oh, from housekeeping, if people have questions along the way, please feel free to use the chat. A few of our colleagues are on and we'll try to address the questions along the way. And we'll certainly try to leave time at the end for Q&A and we'll hit some of them, again, as a panel along the way as well. So first, for Tony and Kelly, how do you think about student athletes as part of your campus recruiting effort? Is there a specific focus? Is it something that's sort of built into the normal process? And do you view them any differently? Kelly, we'll start with you since you're in my upper left.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So on my team, I work specifically as a recruiter, so not quite leading the team, but working quite heavily with liaisons on the school level, and then of course with the students and the candidates themselves. I think for us, recruitment of student athletes is pretty inherent in our process, really at all stages of our cycle. At Alpha Sites, we're primarily recruiting for entry-level positions, so full-time roles for seniors or individuals who are perhaps in their first few years or months even out of undergrad. Additionally, some internship opportunities for individuals who are undergraduate juniors, and then some occasional leadership conferences for sophomores. So when we're on campuses or virtually on campuses at our target universities in the fall recruiting, we're oftentimes heavily liaising with athletic contacts, and we're seeing a lot of students enter our recruitment pipeline that way. And then additionally, in our off seasons and throughout other efforts with universities we don't get the opportunity to interact with as much, we still see a lot of interaction with athletes coming through. And I think to answer the second part of the question, we've seen athletes be incredibly high value in our organization, really at all levels, from entry-level hires to moving through the ranks of leadership and eventually hiring managers themselves. To speak to some of the earlier points, I think the skill sets, whether it be grit, in our case, in dealing with clients or difficult situations, ability to adapt well, to be efficient, to be incredibly goal-oriented, to be coachable and receptive to feedback, have all lent themselves to high performance in our environment. So definitely excited to engage in the conversation today. And I'll pass it over to Tony.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. It's hard to follow in your footsteps there. You kind of provided all my answers. But to start off with, is it, Jeffrey, is it part of our recruiting strategy? Yes, it is, across all campuses. And we'll usually have a past student athlete that we've hired that leads those efforts. I'm going to, I know we're going to dig into this a little bit deeper, but it's not easy. And there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a marathon. It is not a sprint. It is something that will take years, and you need to have a lot of education internally. Similar to what Kelly said, as far as those attributes, those traits that student athletes bring to the table. I think we could go on and on and on as far as what student athletes bring to the table, as far as those traits and how important that is to companies. So, bottom line is it's part of our strategy. It's very important, again, to have someone that's passionate. Again, formerly a former student athlete has proven to be a very, successful strategy for us in the past. Jeffrey?
No, and it's great. It's great to hear. I think, again, to both of your points, they bring so much to the table. Amanda, What are you hearing from the athletes? Do they feel like they are being actively recruited by the companies? Do they feel like they have an advantage or a disadvantage in the process?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And thanks to everyone for having me here today. I'm excited to be a part of this. I think they are feeling like they are being sought after. However, they might run into a wall feeling that way when there may be complete lack of flexibility or understanding of what their commitments are to their athletic team. So whether that be, they have training in the morning and they may not be able to start until 10 or have to log off early. There's just a variety of different scenarios that they may get frustrated with, to be quite honest, of not feeling like they can do both, right? Not like feeling that they can be a student athlete, but then also advance their professional experiences. I think companies that are often successful with student athletes, they're the ones that are, like Tony has talked about, like it's a marathon building their relationships with the campus contacts, with the people in the athletic department that kind of run these type of programs and these departments. And just really building that trust and showing the investment in the student athletes and your willingness to work with them. And we, from our department, we certainly coach them on what they can bring and what traits that they can sell. It's just helping them come to realize some of those because they're so second nature. Some of the things are just inherent in them because they've been doing it for such a long time. But, I see it as our responsibility to really help kind of pull those out on their resume and their ability to articulate them and present themselves as really attractive candidates to employers.
And that crosswalk issue, I want to get back to because I think that's really important. And by the way, not just with student athletes, but I know Tony and I have talked a lot about it with regards to liberal arts students. How do you translate skills that you learn, whether it's on the field as a student athlete or in philosophy class as a philosophy major, in a way that employers can appreciate and value and see how it translates to the real world, if you will. Something else, you talked about the difficulties or challenges some of the students face in actually attending the events and going to the info sessions when the schedule doesn't align. What about those other aspects of career exploration? Do they feel like they're at a disadvantage when it comes to the networking, when it comes to being able to participate in the clubs and other events that help them learn about companies like Alpha Sites or GE or overcome preconceived notions, et cetera?
I mean, I think it's, we're charged with trying to empower our students to take ownership of their professional development. And so we're here to help equip them and direct them to resources, whether that be through their school on campus or whether it's the engineering school or programs that our career advancement office, Northwestern more broadly is doing. The alumni, Northwestern alumni, they do a ton of stuff. And so, we are presenting these opportunities to the students, but ultimately at the end of the day, they're responsible for their own path, right? And so we really try to find that healthy balance of not doing it for them, but equipping them and empowering them and giving them the opportunities and bringing these to their attention that they can then follow through on. Of course, we'll be there to support them through that if they have questions, but trying to instill that independence and that ownership.
No, and that's important. Again, it's the ownership is sort of a theme throughout. How do we, the old proverb about teaching someone to fish versus handing them one? I think that's a great point. Tony and Kelly, again, as you think about this, are you doing different things within your processes to help the students, not just, again, showing up to the info session or the career fair, but other opportunities for exploration?
So I'll kick it off. So Jeffrey, yes. To start off with, it's a big, you have to have a passion for this space to begin with, right? You have to have awareness. So, when you have folks like Amanda that bring this, that works across the university, whether it's with the career centers or with corporate relations, just to bring awareness to, in this case, to GE and to Alpha Sites of these opportunities, right? There are a lot of companies that are just, maybe they have some blinders on or they just don't know, right? So having that awareness is a big step one. The other piece is, from an employer standpoint, we have to get outside of our box, right? We've got to get outside of our, sandbox and go play in some different areas. And that's going to mean that, I agree with Amanda that the student athlete needs to take ownership and all the way through. But on the flip side of it, I didn't know what I didn't know until I knew, right? And that was, they're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and going and doing weights, and then they're hitting the class, then they're doing lunch, then they're watching tape, then they're doing team practice, then they're doing team dinner. And then, maybe they're lucky by 7, 8 o'clock at night, they've got some free time before they got to hit the books. And there was some study tables in between. So from a company standpoint, we've got to be able to work with them too, right? And it may be a career fair, or it may be going and doing some, personal branding, doing some network events, doing some helping them get prepared and getting to know them. It goes back to what I said first. It's not only the relationships with the Amandas of the world or the athletic departments, but we've got to build trust. We got to instill trust. We've got to show consistency. We just can't show up a day or two a year to see the student athletes. They've got to see us consistently. So there's a lot, in my opinion, a lot that goes into the recipe to do that. With that said, the Kellys and Tonys of the world have to help our companies and our managers and our leaders understand that, there is a great population of future employees that are student athletes, and we need to get them into the company. And we've got to help walk them through and show some wins. It could be, a 2-week, work experience during the Christmas holidays, or maybe we catch them a week or two, after the spring semester, or maybe we do something virtual, right? This past year has shown that works. And there's a lot of different avenues, or I won't say a lot, but there are some great avenues that you can have those, those micro internships, those short work experiences that go a long way. Kelly?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with kind of being creative on the part and the ways in which you're reaching out to student athletes. And additionally, a bit to what Amanda was speaking to as well about the student athletes also meeting halfway. I think one thing that's huge on the part of employers is to engage with the events where you see them. Obviously, there are gaps that certainly exist in the marketplace, but there are so many athlete breakfasts or information sessions late at night that these universities already do offer, and are sometimes even in the virtual environment free or discounted to employers. So I think certainly for employers to take advantage. And I think as well, to reach out sometimes to student athletic contacts. I think speaking specifically to Northwestern, I think compliments definitely to their student athletic advisory committee. So many of the student athletes have been incredibly receptive and got on calls and whatnot. So I think in finding individuals and student athletes who are leaders, and maybe to run a creative event with them at a time that they say might work for their team or might work for the organization at large. I think many students are open to that, which certainly demonstrates, of course, strong leadership in the process. I think as well, when these events unfortunately aren't available to target large number of students, or you're not seeing the attendance you like, and with the Zoom fatigue environment that everyone's in, I think there are definitely other ways that employers are proactively engaging students. I think the best advice to anyone dealing with a student, of course, would be these proactive sourcing methods. Of course, on LinkedIn, students know to build out their LinkedIn profiles, but I think if anyone is a Handshake University or engages on the employer level with Handshake Universities, the importance of these Handshake campaigns. We're frequent users of them ourselves. And on the back end, it really is often built with, have you filled out your major? Have you filled out the skill sets that you'd want to gain? Have you filled out the industry interest? Or have you written that you're a student athlete on the profile? So I think the students even taking the 5 extra minutes to do that can also be a great point in meeting halfway to engage them. But I think also, to Tony's point, of course, educating not only recruiters and hiring managers about the benefits of taking these extra steps to engage with these students can go a long way in terms of selling the value proposition of taking the extra time to do these more creative methods.
And the hiring manager is a really interesting point, because again, you both have brought this up. What about the hiring managers, especially for organizations where recruiting student athletes isn't ingrained yet, where they haven't gone through the decades of building those relationships? How do you get hiring managers to look beyond the GPA, to look beyond the major? Like, have you found that to be a challenge, Kelly or Tony?
So Jeffrey, yes, I mean, from a GE standpoint, we historically have had that minimum GPA. So yes, it's been a challenge. And it's something that we're still working through to this day. And, generally speaking, I think the GPA discussion is a big one with many companies, and it's going to change. Part of where we have found success is going back to what I said earlier, and that's going to the student athletes that we've hired, that, we've got an example that we can put in front of a hiring manager where we've had that success. That helps. It's not the cure all, but it gets us a lot further than not having that.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, because we've been doing some programs with companies tied to their ERGs, their employee resource groups or business resource groups, and really engaging the ERGs beyond the let's host an event or let's wear the t-shirt or have a webinar, and actually engaging them in the recruiting and hiring process. That's a really insightful point. And Amanda,
I was gonna say,
sorry, it
can
looks like you're about to
we-
say something. Yeah.
Well, and along those lines, and to Kelly's point too about being creative, what we find is that student athletes don't want to hear from us, and we take no offense to that, but it is so much more impactful when it's peer-to-peer learning. So whether you have a current intern that's a student athlete, if it's at that particular school, great. If not, that's okay. Or if you have an employee that it was a student athlete, I think being able to put those people in front of the student athletes so they can understand, like, I walked in your shoes, I totally get it. Here's how I navigated this. And here's how, this company supports me or supported me during my internship or what have you. That peer-to-peer learning is so impactful, and I think can make a huge difference.
Well, it's also, and the other thing you're bringing up, I think, Amanda, back to how you and I were first introduced through Mike at William Blair, who Mike was not a student athlete, but is a Northwestern alum and loves the idea of giving back. The opportunity that these individuals have to give back to student athletes in a career development way is real. And it goes beyond the let's talk about the football team or let's talk about the bars on campus. The student athletes are hungry for these professional experiences, and the alumni are always looking for new ways to give back. So,
and there's that intrinsic loyalty to their alma mater, right? And so if they can say, I want to get more Wildcats in here, like, how can we make that happen? Like, you have that built-in sense of pride in where you're recruiting from. So why not tap into that?
Yeah. Kelly, were you going to add something on this with the hiring manager? It looks like we caught you on mute before.
I think I definitely agree with the previous points made about, of course, like the peer-to-peer, almost like ambassador learning when these people are on campuses. The student word is so much more authentic than the employer word or the career center word, of course, because they trust their friends, and that's huge. But I think to speak to the original GPA point with the hiring managers, I think so much of it, and I believe this is a point Amanda made earlier, is kind of like the storytelling piece of how much students are willing to speak to it. I think these historical cutoffs and whatnot, but they're a cutoff and they're a range within it that can certainly speak to a number of things. And I think employers are increasingly, particularly in this virtual environment, speaking to students about the challenges that they're facing and really asking them to fill in gaps. So I think the more students can come into conversations really proactively prepared for those questions and being fully willing to kind of provide context about, this is what my schedule looks like, and this was the major that was in, and this is the pivot that I had to make, or these are kind of the other skill sets that I've gained, whereas maybe GPA or the professional experiences didn't look quite up to maybe what is maybe the par that you'd expect. So I think sometimes those students have really awesome storytelling abilities that go beyond maybe what you'd actually see on their resume. See a ton of success in what they're able to produce and speak about.
So can we all agree that companies need to just stop using GPA as a filter?
I can't agree with that.
Can or cannot?
Can.
Is that because you were too? No, I'm kidding, Tony.
No. It goes back to Kelly's point.
I agree with you.
You have to know the whole story, right? You've got to dig a little bit deeper. It's more than a piece of paper, right? You have to understand that student's journey, the student athlete's journey, and what they've been through. I mean, just to be a student athlete, that is a heavy load. But if you look at other students, maybe there's a student that's been working 50 hours a week just to get themselves through school. I mean, I think we have example after example of those types of situations that, until you get to know, I mean, they could have had a life event, right? They could have had a parent pass away. I did great in high school, and I don't know why, but when I got to college, I quickly figured out after my first semester, I didn't know how to study. And that kicked me that first semester of my sophomore year. And I had a little recovery period, or a big one. Just ask my dad, just ask my parents, right? So there's more to it than a resume.
Yeah, I'm shocked that we still have these discussions, and there's still companies. I was on the phone with one last week where they said, "Oh yeah, but everyone here is really smart. We'll only take people with over a certain GPA," and it was baffling to me. But Tony, I want to follow up on something. You talked about the importance of building relationships, and we've talked a lot about that offline. This year was a little different because you couldn't be on campus, whether or not the students were there. Like, how did you find building relationships to hear those whole stories in this environment where you can't actually shake hands or share a drink or pass the chicken wings to someone?
Jeffrey, great question. And, it was this time last year, back up maybe 14 days. So the first part of April when, we were really starting to feel this at GE. And, we flipped 80% of our internships to remote, right, to virtual. And, I'll cut to the chase. And and I don't remember the name of the platform, but it took work, right? You had to be focused. You had to have a plan. During the summers or fall or spring when I'm traveling, if I was swinging by GE Healthcare up in Milwaukee, I'd make it a point to have a round table with all the interns and co-ops or new hires, just to talk to them, right? To get to know them. On campus, I think we can all relate to that. Taking that time to engage in the classroom, whatever the event is, was gone. So we had to be very purposeful in doing that and engaging and reaching out. And it's, fortunately, there were a lot of relationships that were built prior to the pandemic. And thankfully we had those, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have been as successful, because there are some instances where we didn't have relationships and it was very tough to get those audiences or those opportunities to engage with students, whether it's in the classroom or, after hours with the student organization. But, like we said on the front end, relationships matter. It's a marathon. You have to instill trust. You have to be consistent. But, was it 100% successful? I can't say that it was, Jeffrey, but I will say it was probably better than we expected, based on the pandemic, based on the hand of cards that we were dealt.
So, Kelly, I'll put this follow up to you then. When looking back again a year ago, as Tony said, when companies were saying, yeah, we need to do things different, we can't just sort of throw virtual in front of our old ways of doing it, virtual info sessions, virtual career fairs, can't just send emails. Like, what was Alpha Sites doing differently this year, both around student athletes and in general?
Yeah, that's the first thing, of course, was just to demonstrate adaptability on the part of what was going on with the career centers and the student athletic centers as well, especially feedback with people like Amanda to hear, are the students experiencing Zoom fatigue? What is it going to be looking like at the career fair and whatnot? And I think trying to go to as many virtual events and make sure that we're blocking the time on our calendars, but understanding if sometimes there isn't quite the attendance that there's been in previous years, where it seems like there's been misalignment, trying to determine ways that we could pivot. And I think particularly on the Zoom fatigue piece, I think there are a lot of ways to try to hopefully creatively get around that. I think the utilization of alumni at the firms is definitely huge, and as well individuals who become kind of de facto ambassadors on the campus because they interned there themselves, or maybe they've been through the interview process at some point and are going to work there in the coming year and liked the experience and can speak to students. And I think also meeting with students in shorter time blocks. If students no longer have the ability to sit through an hour-long information session or webinar due to these night classes that are getting piled up on the virtual campus, we did things like stopping into club meetings of clubs that we had a lot of alumni at, or different things, and just talking to them for 15 minutes more casually, conducting more introductory calls to people, or looping in alumni and ambassador individuals to do so and to tell us how it went. So I think just trying to find also other blocks of time has been huge, and hearing the student feedback, this is what worked, this is what we liked, this is what we didn't like, just being receptive to it. Because unfortunately we could think something is going really well, but it might not be from the student perspective. So just not getting too attached to any previous ideas we held.
Well, and that's a really important point and a great segue to Amanda. What were you hearing from the students during this petri dish of a year for campus recruiting?
Yeah, a ton of uncertainty. and a ton of anxiety, just because, which we all felt, right? Like we all were feeling that. And I think that was, I mean, I'm a very glass half full kind of person. So I guess that's kind of like, okay, this is the bond that brings us together, right? Like we can talk about this and we have this shared experience that we're all going through. And so let's try and like lean into that a little bit. But I think, especially this time last year, there was just a ton of questions, right? And what my colleague and I had to sit with our students with was, we don't have a ton of answers. Like we just have to ride with it. Like people are trying to figure this out. People are still trying to figure this out. You know, I tell students all the time now, I'm sure companies are still trying to figure out if a summer in-person internship is even going to be viable. Like people are just still trying to see what's going to work. And we just have to be patient. We have to be flexible and roll with it. And in the meantime, look for creative options, right? To fulfill that type of professional experience you're looking to have.
So what are
Jeff,
some, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tony.
hey, Jeffrey, I just want to add something that to what Amanda said. You know, there was a lot of uncertainty, and you know, all of us, we didn't have the answers, right? And early on, crisis communication. I mean, I think I'd like to count how many times we've said communication and relationships, but when we started out, we communicated. And, I had some people inside the company that thought I was just totally off, right? They said, you're going to over communicate. And what we found and what the research has proven is we didn't, right? Students would tell us we were over communicating. But we had, roughly 1,000 summer 2020 interns that were concerned, right? They were kind of freaking out. They didn't know what was going to happen. But even if we didn't know anything, we communicated, and we communicated on a consistent basis. And, if we said we we're going to be back in touch with them in 2 weeks, we were, even if we didn't have any updates. And that proved to be very successful. So, I mean, I think we'll never walk away from communicating, in the right way, but crisis communication was huge. And, Jeffrey, going back to the relationship piece that you were talking about on the front end here, I made a commitment on myself to connect with key stakeholders on campus every 2 weeks, somehow, some way during that first 3 months. And it paid off in a great way. And the same thing with the students. We made a commitment internally to have, at least communicate every so often, and that paid off well. So, it's a two-way street, and I think it was a win-win for all.
And Tony, I can add to that communication. It goes a long way with students. No matter what time of pandemic or not pandemic, the living in that ambiguity is really, really stressful for them, student, athlete, or otherwise. And so I think if you're able to maintain some type of communication and updates, that can really, really go a long way, no matter where they end up, whether it's at your company or somewhere else. Like that is going to leave a good impression for students, and could really pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo that. It's still shocking to me how few organizations, or how many organizations, didn't follow up on that lack of transparency. What's also interesting is I think last year, a lot of organizations got a pass because the students were happy. Just if my internship wasn't canceled, I'm happy. It didn't need to be perfect. And by the way, even if it got canceled, maybe kind of sort of understand I won't be as mad. This year, that's not the case. I mean, companies hopefully have it figured out, which is interesting given how many dynamics we're still seeing taking place. I mean, companies are scared about higher reneg rates. You have hiring managers showing up now saying, hey, we weren't going to have interns, but I need them. Again, the uncertainty about on-site versus off-site, I think to Tony's point, keeping that communication and level of transparency is key, but also making sure that you're sort of prepared for the surprises. One of the things that came up, and again, we're talking about this a little bit, but want to get into a little bit more of the tactics. We talk about the fact that college students have so many of these core skills. I'm sorry, college student athletes in particular have so many of the core skills, and sort of the importance of communicating them well, and employers or prospective employers evaluating them as part of the screening process. Amanda, what advice are you giving to your students how they can communicate that better and how they can better tell the story, especially when the recruiters like Kelly and Tony are seeing thousands and thousands of resumes?
Yeah, I mean, I think a strategy I take is just kind of thinking about it with like an onion with our students of like, okay, you can balance school and your athletic commitment. Why is that important? Okay, well, tell me more about that, right? And why do you think that's important for this particular job that you're applying for, right? And just like going a layer deeper and deeper with them so that they can really have this light bulb moment of, oh wow, like this really does connect, like this really is going to help me. Also just kind of talking through like, walk me through a meeting or with your coaches. What does that look like? Or how do you communicate with your team? Again, stuff that they're doing just inherently that they may not even recognize can be extremely transferable. We also try, and I was an athlete myself. So, I have this opportunity to kind of share what my experience was too, and be able to help bring to light things that they might not even be thinking about, right? One of the most common things that I bring to their attention is their ability to take feedback and to be coachable and to deal with failure. Again, stuff that they've been doing for their whole life. They wouldn't have been able to get to this point if they hadn't. And being able to help them see the connection of how valuable that's going to be and how much that's going to help them stand out against other candidates that may not be student athletes.
Kelly and Tony, given again the number of resumes you're seeing, are you paying attention to those things? And what advice would you give Amanda and the students to make sure that you either are paying attention to or there are other ways to capture your attention? Kelly, it looks like you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think the point Amanda just made on both feedback and failure are huge for us. I think, of course, in any role, but particularly in ours, it's a client-facing position. So you can expect that there are going to be some clients that are more difficult than others. Or in any entry-level role, there is going to be an element of a failure, and not everything's going to come naturally to you. So I think that's so exciting for managers to see amongst entry-level hires that people are willing to come in, and sometimes you fall or you fail, but to accept that and to be okay with it and to jump back up. I think that resiliency is something that athletes are able to speak to across the board, whether it's through their injuries or really tough practice schedules or challenging situations with coach or team dynamics. I've heard so many interesting stories from athletes to that effect. So I think their ability to speak to those resiliency, feedback, failure skills are huge. I think as well, another big piece is that we always notice the athletics on the resume, and we consider it to be a positive thing since we have so many athletes in our organization. But I think some other things that are really helpful to see are when athletes are really results oriented about kind of their involvement. We don't necessarily, when talking about really dive into was your team always the most winning team, and what were the results, but sometimes to hear this is how the team dynamic changed over time, and was my direct contribution, or when I started it was a poorly performing team and we saw a lot of growth and I was involved and I wanted to stick with it. Or to hear one of my biggest motivators in a job is to see an end result and a goal that translates well, to our experience but across experiences. So I think ability to just really think in a lot of ways about the role that you've played on the team, why you ultimately like being a student athlete, some of those like bigger picture questions do kind of come up in the interview process, because I think the fact that the student athlete experience on the resume will definitely get noticed by many employers, but a lot of times the difference between maybe people who progress past the first round or past case rounds and into final rounds and offers are the people who like really are able to delve into their experiences more deeply.
Yeah, that's great.
Jeffrey, I'll just add a couple of things. The points that Kelly brought up are spot on. What I would like to add, I was going to mention, change, right? If there's one thing that's consistent that these student athletes are going to have once they go into their career is change. And, a student athlete has that resiliency and grit, just like Kelly mentioned, that will propel them on. I want to step back and, some guidance is, when you look at those transferable skills, and you couple it to the company and the job, right? See what 2 or 3, maybe 4 transferable skills align to that company's goals, right? Or the specific job, and have, detail in that discussion a little bit more. I mean, you can put it on the resume, but at least when they're having that discussion, maybe it's a cover letter, maybe it's just a phone call they're going to have, but having those 2 or 3 points that they can talk to their transferable skills to what this company is all about or what the job's about, I think will give them an edge, over most students within the university.
And in both of your examples, and maybe I missed it, but I think both of your examples were very focused on the fact that you now have someone reading through the resume, or you're in the interview, or you're having the conversation. One of the things, at least I've heard from a number of student athletes, and Amanda, I'm not sure if you have either, is they can't even get to that point. Someone will look at a resume and maybe they'll see that they were a student athlete, but they'll still see a GPA, or they'll still see a different major. Like, what can student athletes be doing to get through that very top of funnel? Give me the chance to talk with Tony. Give me the chance to have an interview with Kelly, and I know I'll shine, but they can't get to that point.
I think the network, leaning into the alumni network, is top of mind. I mean, it's low hanging fruit, in my opinion, of who do we know there, and how can I get connected that can get me connected to Kelly, get me connected to Tony, and have that kind of, even if it's an informal conversation, just to kind of open that door, is just leaning into that first and foremost.
Tony and Kelly.
Yeah, I think those alumni and other kind of contact, employee referrals and whatnot, those connections make a huge difference. I think as well, the one great thing on the student end to note, if they're truly feeling like they're not getting recognized, is to do a bit of almost reassessment of some of the companies perhaps they're applying to. I know particularly we don't screen by major. In particular, we have individuals who came from traditional business backgrounds and internships, and individuals who came from liberal arts backgrounds and more unique internships, and made a kind of a pivot here really intentionally. And additionally, we do have that focus on athletes. So I think if individuals are repeatedly saying I'm getting screened out because I have XYZ major, or because I was an athlete and I wasn't involved in this business fraternity, or I didn't have this one internship that everyone has, to maybe do a little bit of research, or perhaps either get in touch with your career center or the student athletic contact to say, like, what are the names of the companies that are truly looking for these students, and this is a value add to them. Because even then, if you don't have the direct connection, or you're not able to somehow make it for yourself, you are setting yourself a step further. So I think hopefully kind of the more information gathering that students can do, and that as well athletic contacts can do about who the employers are and building up their relationships, kind of helps on both ends of the spectrum.
Hey, Jeffrey, I'll just add a couple of things. One, go to Amanda. Go to Amanda or Amanda's peer at each respective university. I guarantee there's a connection that can be made there. The faculty, I mean, depending on what company you're looking at, there's some connection out there. I was talking to a university this morning that uses Salesforce, and, as their CRM, and they can dive in and go and make those connections. The Career Center, like I said, they usually have a company connection, and it'd be hard pressed for me to believe that if that connection was made, that a company representative wouldn't have a discussion with that student athlete. It's, if you look at the Kelly and Tonys of the world, part of our challenge is we can't say no.
One thing I'll add though is, I'm very aware that how our office is set up here at Northwestern is very different from a lot of schools, whereas we have 2 dedicated people strictly to career development for student athletes. And again, you'll find every athletic department is made up totally differently. Side note, if you're a company, you're asking yourself, how do I even find these people? Go to the athletic staff directory and look for career services, life skills, student athlete development. Between those things, you'll probably land on the right person. But for schools that might not have a dedicated person or a department to this, find someone in the athletic department. Just honestly, go to their staff directory. Someone will get you to the right spot. And there's some type of support in place for this, I would imagine. Career services and student athlete development is becoming huge amongst college athletics. And so I would imagine there's at least somebody. They may be doing a variety of other things as well. But just know that not all departments are equal in that regard.
No, and that's important, because again, as we're talking through this, both from the company side and college side, We're talking about a lot of, again, big multi-year investments by the companies, dedicated teams at the colleges. But it sounds like most of the suggestions that are coming out are applicable irrespective of what company size or irrespective of what school. One of the other things I just want to highlight is you said something at the beginning of the conversation, Amanda, about the students taking ownership of this and taking personal responsibility and not expecting, it's great if a company's on campus, it's great if they invite the student for an interview or info session, but even if not, to Kelly and Tony's points, there's still opportunities for them to engage. They just need to take ownership. They need to say, yes, I want to work at GE and I saw that Tony's the guy there. Let me reach out to him, or let me talk to Amanda who may have a relationship. One of the other things we've seen, we've talked a lot about alumni, and we've been doing some interesting programs with schools recently where we're seeing students reaching out to alumni, where they're saying, Kelly at Alpha Sites, I know you're a Northwestern alum. Instead of sort of asking you about your time at Northwestern or what your major was or tell me how to get in the door, can I do a project for you? You probably have something on your plate that's not the highest and best use of your time. Can I do a project? Can I help you? And we're seeing some interesting approaches there as well. But again, in all of these cases, the students are taking ownership.
Well, and I'll add too, I saw a comment come through on the chat that I think is really important, is that students are maybe hesitant to reach out. There's this fear of, I hear it all the time, like, I don't want to bother them or they're too busy. And I try and just normalize it for them. If they were in your spot once too, right? Like, it's just a conversation. If you can just think of it as that, it's simply a conversation, and just try and level the playing field a little bit and normalize it a little bit more. Hopefully that'll make them feel a little bit more comfortable to send that LinkedIn request or send that email.
Yeah, I mean, Tony and Tony and I have talked about this. Tony's a Purdue alum, like as a Purdue student reaching out to him, wanting to have a conversation. We know he's going to take it, and he would take it even for an Indiana grad like me.
You're right.
But the other part of that is, and it goes back to that student responsibility, make sure that you have a real ask. Don't ask Kelly or Tony or anyone else stuff that's clear on the website. Don't ask them about things that aren't going to impact your decision. Be intentional. Great point, and happy you said it. Tony, were you going to add something? I saw you unmute.
Well, it just, we've been talking a lot about, what the student or student athlete needs to do. They need to take control of their destiny. There's a piece of it, the Kellys and Tonys that are familiar and understand the student athlete space. I mean, we have to help our employers and other employers understand the value, right? And it's, I made some notes ahead of time. I did some digging, but I said, just do it. Right. And it's not meant to be a play off of Nike, but it
Well
is
done.
kind of. But, integrate student athletes into your recruiting strategy. There are nearly 500,000 NCAA student athletes, and fewer than 2% go on to be professional athletes. That's 10,000 students. That means there's about 490,000 student athletes that are looking for a job. So, I mean, that's just one thing. And it's, I've got other things, but from a university standpoint, if you like the Amandas of the world, universities that have the staff, help us understand, help companies understand what we don't know, right? I see it happening with the Amandas of the world where they're working with career services and they're coming in and they're speaking to the employers. Keep doing that. And if you're not doing that, do that, right? But there's a big ask on the employers too, to better understand, the student athletes and other similar students in this same space to step back and there's a lot of great students that we're missing is the bottom line, I think.
Well, and that brings up a question that came up in the Q&A. You talked about the outdated use of GPA, which again we all agree on. What other ways can employers who are getting thousands and thousands of applicants narrow the pool? Like how are you guys going and doing that to again make sure not just student athletes don't fall out, but other individuals like the ones you alluded to before don't fall out? Kelly, you want to hit it first?
Yeah, I can touch on this a little bit. I think for our team, we're currently doing really manual application reviews still, and manually reviewing one-way video assessments. If people are familiar, with Convey IQ or these other kind of platforms and vendors, that's definitely something that especially with smaller recruiting team sizes that operate as leaner teams, is just something that's like part and parcel for the course. I think one thing that's really helpful advice to students is to send those follow-up messages. I know it was mentioned earlier that sometimes the alumni requests and whatnot are really tough to make. But sometimes if people can't even get on a 15-minute phone call with you, if you sent them a LinkedIn request, if you followed up to their handshake message, they will always be looking at your profile and will take an extra note. So I think even when you feel like you're just faceless in this process, if you do have a way to personalize it, I think that does help individuals stand out in large kind of application numbers. And I think as well, understanding that in this virtual environment, even when you're in that one-way video assessment environment, I know for some students it feels so challenging and so impersonal, but unfortunately sometimes with large scale hiring classes and with these programs, it's a step of the way. So to try to like normalize that process for students and to hopefully provide some hope for them that someone is personally reviewing this and they're trying to get a sense of your personality and how you are on the spot and why you're interested in the skills, even though it does feel like a short time. So I think just normalizing that for student contacts and hopefully giving them maybe like exposure on the part of maybe more so, I guess, would be like the athletic contacts at the school, that's okay. And it's something that you will see would also be helpful, because it is something that unfortunately is just sometimes a necessary evil when there are tons of people applying.
I'll add a couple points, Jeffrey, and that is, in the virtual world, it's been tough in some instances where you have platforms where you can put some filters in on who you're going to talk to. And, what we've encouraged our teams to do is, we understand that there's only so many spots, but, talk to everyone, right? So when we're on campus, even if your GPA in the past didn't meet our minimum threshold, we still talk to you, right? And we tried to understand what happened and, how they're going to recover, when they're going to recover. But, one is just talk to them. The other thing is to be open to non-traditional approaches, right? We touched on earlier the opportunity, throughout the year, right? Or even during the holidays where you can do a short-term experience. What I said earlier, that micro internship. And I want to make a couple points. I was talking to a university this morning that had received some feedback from students that did just that over the Christmas holiday timeframe. And, the student said, and it was a student athlete, said, I contributed ideas found through my research and the company actually implemented and credited me for them, right? And there's more and more that I could go on. But the point is, the students see that the company cared or cares, and it was authentic. And, conveying a company's culture in the world we're in right now goes a long way. And going back to the alumni, right, of the school that, and maybe it was a student athlete, maybe it wasn't, but alumni will take those calls. They will have that 15 or 30-minute conversation. And that has proven to be able to convey our culture in a way we never thought it could. And that's just a way that, that student's going to develop a relationship with that individual. And that's powerful. So, and it's empowering our employees to do that and say, it's okay to do that. The other thing I'll say is, someone mentioned send a LinkedIn message. Amanda and those other university representatives that are listening in, don't let the student stop at one time, right? Maybe they don't check their LinkedIn very often. Maybe they, they could have missed it, but, following up in a professional way 2, 3, 4 times is not bad, right? They just may have missed it, but
Shows
they
grit.
see. Yes, thank you.
I was going to mention that too. I mean, a central theme around today's call has been that relationship building communication piece, right? And so it's coaching the students on how they can, continue those relationships beyond just a LinkedIn request, because that is just going to have so much more of an impact, so we'll tell them, set up Google alerts for the companies that you're interested in, see what they're doing, follow them on Instagram or Twitter, see what stuff is going on. So it gives you natural talking points that you're not just like, what do I talk about with them now? Right. Like you have a conversation piece to kind of initiate that, that email or that message. And then you can just kind of keep the conversation rolling from there.
And look, this is true for student athletes in particular. because these are all the same skills that they've developed on the field or on the court. They're the things that make them successful: the grit, the follow-up, the self-discipline. Again, they're applicable to everyone, but student athletes need to just sort of take ownership of that.
Well, and it's, you know, we try and equate it back to when they were being recruited to come to their university. You know, they were having to have these conversations with the coaches and even maybe possible teammates, and they're having to build those relationships over time, over potentially like a 2-year time frame. And so we try and show that parallel, and then that really clicks of the investment that they had to make in those relationships to get to Northwestern, and then how they can then use those same type of strategies as they are looking for internships and job prospects.
The other thing I really want to highlight here, and it goes back to something I think both Kelly and Tony hit on, was it's not just a one-way street. Again, for the employers on the call, Tony's example of the student who did the micro internship over winter break or whatever, or whenever it was, like, think about the opportunity to build a relationship with a student who may not have been considering your company otherwise, who may not have thought about applying, or who may have thought they weren't qualified for the marketing role because they weren't a marketing major. Think about what that does from a competitive advantage perspective in your campus recruiting, especially when so many of these students are getting inundated with the emails to show up to the career fair and come to our event, and we want, like, they're not reading them, which is why the attendance is down 50 to 90%. One thing I want to highlight real quickly, and again, look, I'm biased about micro internships, as all three of you know, and everyone on the call knows. But one of the things we found to the question that was posed is that the other nice thing about using these project-based experiences, whether you do them on your own or through our little thing, is that you can actually engage the hiring managers in that screening process. That, as opposed to Kelly or Tony or Amanda or whomever flipping through thousands of resumes trying to decide who they want to invite to an interview, let someone on your marketing team who has a project they don't want to do anyway, give it to a college student and let them, and when the student does that project, then give them feedback to you. Then say, hey, Tony, Jeff was amazing, we need to recruit him. Or Jeff did a good job, but his communication skills were subpar. Maybe he's not the right person for them. That's okay. But you're engaging them in a process in a way that lets them look beyond the four corners of a resume. Tony, it looked like you were going to add something. I saw you unmute.
Well, it was just, I saw the question that came up from Kristen, and I was just going to add one thing there, and I'm sure Kelly has, a dozen ideas here, but when we were recruiting virtually, and let's step back a year ago to summer of 2020, we knew that, we weren't going to be able to be on campus. So we want to be able to convey some of those similar messages that we would convey in person. So let's just say a traditional information session, and we felt that, the students were going to get overwhelmed by every company there. So what we did is we hosted a webinar series throughout the summer. One of those, and I'll just use the example of the, get to know GE session. We had that webinar session. It was well attended, but we recorded it and we posted it, right? So that then it was on demand for the student. It wasn't dependent on their schedule whatsoever to come find us. I look at, student athletes in this sense, and, we didn't do a good job there of getting that information out to the Amandas of the world to say, hey, take a look at this. I've just thought about it. It's like, I need to get that over to Amanda that she could share that with the student athletes because the information is still valid. But that's one of the things that worked for us. And what we didn't do that we should have done is, when you look at all of the attendees that showed up, we should have taken, that segment of Northwestern students and then put them into another bucket to have a smaller event. We did that a little bit, but we missed the target on that one. But that proved to be very successful for us this past summer.
That's great. We're at the 5-minute mark. So one last question for each of you, and we'll start with Kelly because I'm working around, at least from my screen. What is the one piece of advice you would give to the employers on the call about recruiting student athletes, and the one piece of advice you'd give to the universities who are working with the student athletes?
Definitely a big question. Hard to necessarily pinpoint one thing. I think for the employers, of course, individuals on the call are aware of the inherent value of student athletes. So that's already established. But I think now that you know that, just being willing to meet people halfway, get creative, implement some of these strategies, hopefully relationship build. No, that's been said a lot, both on the student end and with these contacts, and to develop creative programming. I think when we've hosted events specifically for athletes, or we've done some skill building webinars specifically for athletes, we've seen them be well attended. So I think being willing to just try new things, especially in this environment, it's low risk when it's on Zoom. And then I think for the student athletic contacts on the call, I think employers are always, of course, willing to connect and build up relationships where there haven't been. And I think as well, love to take input and feedback on individual students. We're always happy to speak about our opportunities. And then when you have students who are struggling to find that niche in the process, to see if there is perhaps a place based on what we have or our roles. So I think certainly happy to just kind of keep the conversation on going on both ends, and just get creative, because I think both sides are hopefully willing to meet halfway for this common goal.
That's great, Kelly. Thank you. Tony.
Okay, universities. If you're a university, pick 2 companies, reach out to them, and have a student athlete event. You know, help us, help educate us, help companies bring student athletes into their recruiting strategy. From a company standpoint, or from the companies on this call, think outside of the box. You know, a student athlete's not going to be able to likely spend 10 weeks interning with a company. So take a risk, pick 2 schools, do 2 micro internships with 2 student athletes, see how it works out. That's my guidance.
Thank you, Tony. Amanda.
Yes, I would say for the employers, and it's a bit repetitive, but from what my colleagues have said here, but these are exceptional candidates. And so I think flexibility is really key. And just, that creative solutions, and just kind of being willing to think outside maybe your structured program to help get this talent in your pipeline. And then from schools, I would say, don't be afraid to make the ask, right? Like, connect with these different employer contacts and make the ask, whether it's a abbreviated program or, help being that advocate for the student athlete based on their schedules, and just helping, educate the employers. But then also internally, listen to your students, like, hear what they're feeling, hear what they need, hear what their interests are. So then you can even be a better resource for them of whatever industries they're interested in, or challenges that they're facing, that then you can continue to be the advocate for them and help them succeed.
I love all of those ideas. And again, themes about creativity, finding creative ways. Again, last year we had this crazy environment of the Petri dish. This year it's continued. Like, you can take risks, and not every risk is a bet the company or bet your career type of risk. So be creative, find ways for that. The other theme that I heard flow through a lot was self-ownership. Again, helping the students take ownership of their pathway. And the last thing that I love that all 3 of you, I think, hit on was empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of the individual. If you're a company, put yourself in the shoes of the student. Find creative ways to engage them after hours, new ways to give them opportunities, even if it doesn't fit squarely into the box that you've always used. And as universities, finding creative ways to engage employers. They value your student athletes. They're looking to drive diversity. They want to build those relationships. Anything you can do to, again, put yourself in their shoes and focus on how these initiatives don't just help your students, but also help those employers as well. With that, thank you so much, Kelly, Amanda, Tony, for joining us. This was so much fun. I feel like I could talk to you for hours more, and you guys know I can talk. This was wonderful. Really appreciate all of the leadership all 3 of you are doing in this space. And to all of the participants, thank you so much for joining. We'll be sending around a recording and summary of this for those of you that maybe had some athletic commitments and couldn't watch it during the day. Tony's point. And with that, this concludes this session. Thanks again.